Hi, my name is Gerhard Schwartner, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live podcast with uh, Jen Allen. I want to pronounce it the German way, Knuth.
That's right. You got it right. No one ever gets it right on the first guess.
Right. He's the founder of DemandJen. Um, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
So, our topic today is we're living in a slowing economy and people want to accelerate their pipeline. What are three things that sales leaders can do right now to increase the acceleration of their pipeline?
Yeah. So I would say number one, and this costs nothing, and I'm always shocked by how few people do this, is if you want good pipeline, which is an output, we have to look at the inputs, what's going into it. So I think it's understandable that we tend to track activities, how many calls are being made, how many emails are being sent. But one of the questions I'll ask a lot is, have you looked at the outreach that's being sent to your buyers? And what do you think of it? Is that an email that you would reply to? And I'm usually met with, well, no, we haven't. We're typically tracking the activities. So number one is ask your team, just you can do it in a simple Google sheet. Ask your team to pick an account, a prospect, and name the account and the prospect and their title, and then write a cold email and write the subject line as you normally would. Put that all in a Google sheet and then review and just see, what is the messaging we're using? Are we personalizing? What do we think personalization means? Are we solution dumping? Are we giving someone a different way of thinking about their world? And so I think number one is we have to assess current state. I think the tendency right now is there's so many shiny objects. We can just, it's a little bit easier, I think, to try to buy a tool and hope that the tool will work. But I think sales has always been about having good conversations that get a customer to rethink their business differently. And so we have to look at what is being said. So that would be number one.
So, study the message and see how you can improve it.
Yep. See what the thoughts, see what the beliefs and assumptions of your sellers are.
Right.
When I was a seller, I believed that a cold email was pitching my solution. I think it's really hard for a solution pitch to cut through the noise today because there are so many solutions. There are so many technologies that make it easier for companies to spray and pray. And so I think we have to think differently about the message. So yes, see if the message is actually compelling itself. Number two, I would say, I think one of the other missteps I made as a salesperson is I was always trying to chase the big sexy logos. Like I worked for Challenger and I would look at an account list and I would say, all right, who's got the biggest account teams that we could possibly sell to? And every year the same 5 companies would be at the top of my list because I knew if I could close a deal with them, they'd be massive. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going for the big guys, but what I neglected to do is I only looked at the demographic fit. I did not look at the problem fit. So I would look at, they've got lots of salespeople. Awesome. Let me put all this energy into trying to sell to them. What I didn't think about was, is there even something happening in their business, their market, their industry that would necessitate them thinking differently about how they sell, which was essentially the solution that I provided. And so I would spend all this time chasing the number one players in the market, not realizing that number 2, 3, 4, and 5 were actually probably a better sweet spot for me. So it didn't mean I couldn't chase number one. It just meant I had to think differently about the message. I had to come with a point of view that would challenge why they think status quo was not good enough. So
it's really, I love what you're saying because it made me think that when you think about the word ICP, the acronym, ideal customer profile, but what you're doing is you're reframing it. What is the ideal problem profile?
Oh, I like that. Down with IPP. But that's true, right? Because people don't buy solutions to problems they don't believe they have.
Yeah.
And so I think I was neglecting how much of focus I had on, is there a problem worth solving here? Hoping the solution would woo them into buying. And then number 3 would be to pool all of our closed lost opportunities from the past 12 months and be very critical of when we see things like timing or budget or ghosted or not interested, looking back at the conversations to see, did we ever sort of unveil a problem? Or were we as salespeople really focused on pitching a solution, hoping it would make a prospect believe they have a problem?
Yeah.
So I think there's always gold in the closed lost opportunities. And where I would lose a lot is I would take timing or budget and say, well, that's not a me problem. That's our product is too expensive, or it's just not the right time. When I really started analyzing it, what I realized was I was never giving them a reason to act and act now. And so there were a lot of companies that I missed on that if I had treated the sales experience differently, I probably could have won.
When it comes to data in your Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever you're using, how accurate is that data really, and how current is the data? And what is your advice for helping sales leaders give their salespeople a better set of data?
I think it's hard, right? So I remember when I would work with companies in manufacturing, they would have so much transactional volume. Like, oh, maybe there's a part that this company wants to buy, and then they change their mind and they don't. So their sales team would just get into the behavior of saying, I'm not going to create an opportunity and log a conversation until I know that there's something there. And I was like, man, that is a tough thing to unwind, because it's really hard to get a salesperson to do an activity that doesn't yield money back in their pocket. Where I do think today is very different is there's so much technology that allows you to kind of remove that kind of activity from your sellers' plates. And so to the extent that you have, I think, situations like that where there's just so much transactional activity, I would kind of lean towards the fact that of all the places you want your sellers setting time, do you actually want them manually entering this information into Salesforce or HubSpot? Or do you want a Gong or what is the one I use? Oh my gosh. How do I Fathom? I'm like, well, I use this every day. How do I remember? Do you want something that's doing that reports back to your CRM so that you can actually free up low value time? And I think this idea of like freeing up low value time, I don't love that narrative, because I think sometimes we lump prospecting into that. And I don't think prospecting is ever or will ever be a low value activity. But I would say like something like manually typing notes into CRM, there's technology to fix it. That would probably be a technology bet I'd want to place.
Is there sort of a pipeline diagnostic that you do with your clients?
So I wouldn't say there's a pipeline diagnostic. What I tend to do is I'll do that first exercise that I mentioned. I'll say, let's just look at current state. What is the messaging that's being used? Yeah. More often than not, what I see is it's how I think most of us were taught to send a cold email. And this stuff worked, by the way, 20 years ago when we didn't have the technology to spam our prospects. But the flow is usually, my name is Jen. I hope you're well. I'm reaching out because you're VP of this or that. We're the #1 provider of this. And here's the 5 problems we help companies solve. And here's a bunch of logos. And are you interested to meet next Thursday? And I think sometimes we hold on so deeply to things that used to serve us well, and we don't recognize how the market has changed.
Yeah.
Well, a message like that could work. Now I think it just contributes to the noise. And so one of the things I'll do is I'll do that assessment with them to say, let's look at the messages that are being sent. And it might be a belief system problem, right? Like, I believe this is the right way to send a cold email. That's totally fixable. We just got to teach people why that's no longer as effective.
So what would a problem-focused email sound like?
Yeah, so there's a framework that I use called problem prompting, where I'll break it down like this. The first line is appeasing that your reader is selfish. If an executive is in their inbox, they're looking for, what do I need to do and what's about me? They're not looking for the I hope you're wells and things like that. And so the first line should be an observation about something you see their business trying to achieve. And this is very easy to gather now. I can go to ChatGPT, I can type in, who is the CEO of this account or the founder of this account, and what are the most recent interviews about the company's strategic objectives this year? And I will get back, if I use the O3 model, I'll get back a table and it cleanly lays it out. So I don't think there's any excuse for not doing it, even for private or small companies. So that's giving me my first line. What is the company trying to achieve? The second line is then a problem hypothesis. As a result of that objective, I'm not sure if doing this thing feels harder. Now, I'm always using unsure tonality, because anytime I'm talking about someone else's business, I'm an outsider looking in. I do not know, no matter how much research I do. And so I'm not going to say things like, you must be struggling with, because that's offensive, and I would never say that to someone's face. So an unsure tonality, problem hypothesis is number 2. Then number 3 is, instead of saying, and we work with all these companies and we delivered ROI, of tens of thousands and millions of dollars, which we love to do, which immediately turns it into a pitch. What we can do instead is position ourselves as people who hold insight. So Acme Company was up against something similar. Are you open to hearing what they did that worked to fix it? And then either way, the close is like an either way, which I think is a softener. Either way, then you use your personalization. So I think what we tend to do is try to put the personalization up top. But what I see a lot is there's this really forced switch from like, hey, Jen, I saw you love rescue dogs. Anyway, we're the leading provider of IT and engineering talent. And you're just like, oh, I wish you didn't do personalization at all. So I actually like it better at the bottom because I think it's a signal that this is a human sending a message to another human. And it's telling them, I'm not trying to use it as a bait and switch. So when you get to the end, what I want the reader to feel is this isn't someone who's desperate to book a meeting. This is someone who's taken a few minutes to hypothesize what we are trying to achieve, what might make that hard, and is offering me a conversation of ideas. And that in turn also changes what that first conversation looks like.
I like what you're saying, that you're presenting ideas, a menu of ideas, and let them pick and choose. And then you have a conversation about ideas and not about your product.
I do. I mean, if we think about why people go to conferences like yours and events, it's because we're all very curious of what are other people doing that I'm not? Is someone doing something smarter, better, faster?
Yeah.
And I think when you have a conversation like that, I mean, that's why I go to conferences. When I learn from people, then I get really curious about what they do. And I think sometimes we get it backwards. We try to lead with the solution and all of our logos and map of the world and how long we've been in business and hope that impresses people. But I think when we really explore what connects us, it's great ideas. And so that's what I'm trying to capture in an email like that.
Well, I want to share with the audience that on Thursday, June 26th, you will be speaking on the topic of how to build and accelerate pipeline and avoid the shiny objects. We are very proud to have you. And we already have over 500 director level sales leaders signed up. We're going to go over 700 probably or more. And as you said, that people go there to see what do other leaders do. So we have about 22 experts that share their insight, but also on our virtual conferencing platform, Brella.io, you can actually communicate and network with anybody that's
Yes.
It's really cool. And I'm sure you're going to drop a lot of wisdom. And while you are presenting, you can actually share links with your website or with white papers or have you written a book, Jen?
I have not written a book.
I would expect you to do that.
I hear that, but I am not ignorant to what a book writing process what goes into that.
Right.
And I think it's intimidating, honestly.
Well, that's why we have ChatGPT. What is so amazing about you is that you offer people a playbook for DemandJen, and you explain the why to do it that way and not another way, and you also have the ability to unite two worlds, the world of technology and the world of humanity, because you use your instincts and your EQ and your IQ together to create ROI.
Well, that means a lot to me. I want to say I don't think that comes from nowhere. I was very lucky to grow up in an organization with excellent managers, excellent coaches, and people who took the time to kind of slow me down and change my perception of what I thought sales was. I talk about this a lot. Like, you look at any movie or TV show where a salesperson is portrayed, and it's always some handsome dude in a slick suit that can walk in a room and say the right thing and never takes no for an answer. And to me, that was massively intimidating about breaking into sales because it was just so against who I was. So I was very lucky to have managers who taught me that who you are is exactly who you should bring to a sales conversation. Like you said it, but EQ matters as much as IQ. And nobody likes to be convinced. Nobody likes to be talked at. And so if you can remember those things when you're having a sales conversation and not fall back into this portrayal of what people think sales is, you will be far more successful than trying to mold yourself into something that you're not. So I think that's why I ultimately ended up in training. Sales training is I would never have seen that for myself, but because I've seen it firsthand how important it is and how much of a difference it made in my own career.
So what was your most memorable sale, Jen?
Oh my gosh, my most memorable sale was my first 7-figure sale. There's nothing like that. And it was also the moment when I really realized the power of a sales conversation and how much control we actually do have over an outcome. Do you want to hear about it, or is this like a person
Absolutely.
talking about like everybody loves to talk about their first, like their most memorable deal. I shared this story the other week. It was a company I would have never prospected. Like we talked about before, it was never in the top of my list. They were a manufacturer that sold pumps and valves that controlled the flow of water. And I got an inbound, and the inbound was asking for negotiation training, which was not something the company I was working for provided. So I got on the call and just said, look, there's nothing to lose. I'm not going to convince her not to do negotiation training. Let me just kind of seek to understand. So she got on the call and I said, it sounds like you're looking for negotiation training. May I ask, like, where did that come from? How did you guys land on negotiation? And she said, well, we are losing late stage because we're losing on price because there's a low-cost Chinese competitor that is just totally eating our lunch. And so we decided as a leadership team that we need to get our reps to be better at negotiation. And so I said, can I ask an awkward question? Is there actually any sort of performance difference between you and this like cheaper part? And she said, absolutely. We have documented evidence that our parts reduce downtime, which for a manufacturing plant is like the worst word you can possibly hear, right? As you know. And so I said, okay, does negotiation phase feel like the right time to bring that up? And she said, absolutely not. And then I did what I had been taught to do by my manager. I just shut up and I just sat there. And then I saw her wheels start turning and she goes, we're solving for the wrong problem, aren't we? And I was like, I can't say you are or you aren't, but I think it's definitely worth pulling together the team to explore if this might be an earlier stage problem, because I would hate to see you spend all this money. It was a team of like 1,200 or 1,500 reps globally. I'd hate to see you pull all those people off the line and train them on something that didn't impact the outcome you're looking for. And so what I didn't know was they had already had 3 providers they had gone through like proof of concept with. Their procurement team, I think, asked them to find a 4th because that was their procurement, process. And so they were reaching out just to be like, let me just check a box. And so she invited me in front of the leadership team. I sort of went and dug into that. And then they stopped the process with everybody else and we ended up winning it. And it was one of my favorite customers I ever worked with. And it taught me, like, I don't think there was a better lesson in my career of how powerful great questions can be in a sales process.
How much was the sale?
It was 1.97. I was just shy of that too. But then later on, because of the strength of the relationship we built, I closed a 2.5. And I think that was the biggest deal I ever closed. So it was my first 7-figure deal and the biggest deal I ever closed. Great customer. Still keep in touch.
The $1 million sales star, Jen Allen-Knuth.
I wish they were all that big, but they're not.
Right. And it's hard to repeat.
It is, but it did teach me, like, if you go in trying to convince someone of something, you will almost always lose because someone can feel that. If you go
But
in
I think
genuinely curious.
it's also a wonderful story about how buyers are never challenged by the salesperson. How did you land on that conclusion?
I think there was this moment where I was in my head, I'm listening to her logic and I'm thinking 1 + 1 = 3. And
Right.
I've really been intentional about, after that experience, looking for those moments where you're not seeking to judge, you're seeking to understand. And when you're trying to understand and you as an outsider looking in say, this is a 1 + 1 = 3 moment, you are not acting in service of the buyer if you don't speak up. right? And it doesn't mean that they will always agree with us. And I
Right.
think it's also important to make it their aha. So what worked about that scenario was I didn't come in and say, you've got it all wrong. And the actual problem is this, because I think then people put their defenses up, which is a really hard thing to overcome as a salesperson. Instead, I asked a question where she got the wheels turning. She had the aha moment, and then it was her idea. And
Yeah.
whenever it's their idea, I think they hang up the phone and they can't wait to go tell everybody else, because what do we all love? We love looking smart, funny, helpful. And so she had the opportunity to go and do that. And I think that's what made it work. It wasn't that I said the magic thing. It was more I asked a question that got her to
Right.
have that aha moment.
Yeah, and also you put yourself in the role of a co-thinker or a collaborator, and not somebody who lectures people,
Yeah,
which is easy to do. You know,
it is.
when you're with a really big company, they usually lecture the smaller companies.
I genuinely think the reason I did it was because I knew going into the call we didn't have a solution to help her with.
Yeah,
So I think it was like that freed me from feeling like I had something to lose.
yeah,
And I think that was a really good experience for me, because I think sometimes when you book a meeting, and pipeline was always hard for us to build. Like no
yeah,
matter how big the challenger sale book was, it was hard to get people to say, and you need a partner to come in and build out the methodology. And so pipeline was always hard. And so I feel like I had this fear of losing. And Josh Braun writes about this really well. I love the way he talks about this. He's like, when you are attached to an outcome that you don't actually have, you are never going to show up as your best, because you're afraid to do things because you're afraid to lose. If you go in and say, I don't have anything, I have a conversation, that is it, you
right.
actually will show up way more effectively than if you go in trying to like protect yourself against a loss.
And here's a book.
Cool. Zen, hold on, what is it? Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Right. And you went in with the beginner's mind.
Ah, I like that.
It's a book Mark Benioff recommended.
Well, I will look at it, and I will also, per our conversation before we hopped on, maybe get my son to look at it too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jen. I invite everybody to sign up for the Sales 3.0 conference, the Revenue Acceleration Summit, where Jen will be speaking, and there will be a link below on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited for July. Thank you for having me.